It's hard to believe a film as innocuous as The Big Lebowski has such an interwoven, complex narrative. What starts as a simple mistaken identity of an unemployed hippie bowler who calls himself the Dude quickly transpires into a kidnapping conspiracy where a washed-up millionaire named Jeffrey Lebowski's young trophy wife Bunny
I'll suck your cock for $1,000.
is taken for ransom by nihilists, one of whom happens to be the basis of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, only for Maud, a feminist artist who is the daughter of Jeffrey Lebowski, to accuse Bunny of kidnapping herself, but it turns out that Bunny took a random unannounced trip. Then there's this private investigator trying to get Bunny back to her family, and a pornographer named Jackie Treehorn who just wants money that Bunny owes him. Then there's this eccentric bowler who calls himself Jesus, who's accused of being a sex offender.
8-year-olds, dude.
But all that matters is this rug. The Big Lebowski was hypothetically my first ever real film essay, and I remember my lecturer, Dr. David Stevenson, inspired me to pursue the notion that if you have something interesting to say, you should say it. This is a chance to go back and explore one of my first ever proper analysis projects in a much more informal context. So this video is partially based on my first academic essay, which also happened to be the highest grade in the class, but we'll just go on with that. In that essay, I became so transfixed and obsessed over this seemingly irrelevant prop because of how significant something so ordinary can be. Now, we're barely going to scratch the surface of how much is going on in The Big Lebowski, but what really intrigues me is how the story doesn't really matter.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like, your opinion, man.
The Big Lebowski is curiously more intriguing for what is going on in the background than what we're actually seeing in the foreground. The film sets up what is potentially a deep and interesting narrative, only to never fulfill that desire. And the reason for this is that our hero simply lacks the motivation to drive the story forward. Instead, the story comes to him, and by the end of each scene, he's back to his old life as if nothing ever happened. It's a mature narrative that abruptly clashes with an entirely different world. But this rug means something. It not only ties the room together, but also ties Dude's story together.
That's fucking interesting, man. That's fucking interesting.
In reality, the story of The Big Lebowski is not about the conspiracy surrounding Bunny's disappearance. It's actually about Dude, an everyday guy who lives his life one day at a time with a complete absence of stress, routine, or objectives. This is completely opposite of both fact and fiction. In real life, our day is consumed by many things that keep us busy and distracted, and the same applies to fiction, where goals, obstacles, and conflicts drive us through a dramatic rhythm of emotions. Dude's life is, fortunately for him and unfortunately for us, not like this. His journey is one smooth, mellow rhythm that becomes disrupted by different individuals. You can think of The Big Lebowski like a piece of music. There is a rhythm to its delivery and a beat to both its action and comedy. So for Dude to have a much more engaging narrative journey, we have to distort his casual flow in some way to create dramatic impact. By removing the rug, we give Dude a motive that reflects his irrelevancy and lack of responsibility. The rug effectively forces Dude's involvement in a story that doesn't actually require him. Once he has obtained a rug from the real Jeffrey Lebowski, his quest is complete and all matters of concern to him have been addressed. Essentially, Dude's story is over. He has walked away victoriously and we can conclude on a happy ending. Well, nothing's ever that easy.
It just seemed interesting to us to thrust that character into the most confusing situation possible. The person, it would seem, on the face of it, least equipped to deal with it. That's sort of the conceit of the movie.
It's not hard to see that The Big Lebowski is a neo-noir that plays satirically on the conventions of hard-boiled detective thrillers.
As very loosely sort of based on the sort of narrative structure of like a Chandler novel, you know, and those novels are very episodic in nature. They usually follow the main character as he sort of encounters these different characters on a sort of journey to uncover a mystery or find a missing person or whatever it may be in the novel.
As the Coens explained, the narrative structure is loosely based on the work of Raymond Chandler, who stated that when writing pulp magazine fiction, this scene outranked the plot. The Big Lebowski follows a relatively similar formula. It's comprised of many isolated scenes that lack a connection to the overall mystery, mostly because we are jumping between two drastically different narratives, one about the everyday antics of Dude, and the other a crime drama in the same vein as the Coens' earlier films like Blood Simple and Fargo.
Rule every little fucking gate here. Here's your $4, you pathetic piece of shit.
Dude plays your archetypical detective whilst all the other characters slot into their conventional positions.
This is what happens when you fuck a stranger in the ass!
The story is then told entirely from the first person point of view. We view everything through Dude's eyes, and his experiences reflect his own sensibilities and philosophy, ironically making the actual urgency of the central plot comedically less pressuring. So the complex rhythm of the noir is ultimately tuned to fit the casual rhythm of Dude, who, despite coming across many obstacles, returns to his everyday life at the end of each scene.
Ah, fuck it, dude. Let's go bowling.
This one we sort of figured, you know, if things are become a little bit too complicated and are unclear, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the plot is kind of not the... and again, this is similar to Chandler. The plot is sort of secondary to the other things that are sort of going on in the piece, I think. And if people get a little bit confused, it's I don't think really necessarily going to get in the way of them enjoying the movie.
But the rug is a MacGuffin, a plot device that motivates the character into pursuing but ultimately has no real context to the larger story.
MacGuffin you see in most films about spies. It is a thing that the spies are after. It's always called the thing that the characters on the screen worry about, but the audience don't care.
In the case of Alfred Hitchcock, the money in Psycho, for example, is a MacGuffin because it drives Marion's motivation to leave town, where she ends up at the Bates Motel, and the real narrative ensues when she is abruptly pulled into a drama disconnected with hers. As a result, the money becomes irrelevant to the story, but has precipitated the main conflict of the film. The rug may not have any relevance, but it does serve as a catalyst to the story. It causes Dude to become involved and acts as a bridge between two very different narrative worlds, one that is conservative and the other progressive.
But yeah, it is true that the movie does the sort of catalyst for the plot. The whole sort of beginning of the movie has to do with a rug being soiled in a sort of very particular way. And the main character's sort of journey through the movie is an attempt to sort of get redress for his soiled rug.
But it's not exactly just a plot device to further the story. It's also a component of symbolism, which is in fact far more significant to Dude's character than a story that doesn't actually matter. Again, despite how harmless The Big Lebowski is, the film is riddled with symbolic ideas. For example, the foreshadowing of Donnie's death. When the nihilists confront Dude, this line is emphasized.
Excuse me?
I said we cut off your Johnson!
Then, on the back of Donnie's shirt, it says,
Johnson!
Which just so happens to coincide with his streak of successful strikes being broken by the one pin that remains, almost seemingly triggering his bad luck, in which this happens.
Oh, God, they shot him, man.
It's not shot, no, dude. It's a heart attack.
But heck, you could even take the idea of cutting off his Johnson as a more literal interpretation, by relating it to the film's modest theme of masculinity. We have Jeffrey Lebowski, who sees himself as a true reflection of an honourable man, despite later being exposed as a man who has nearly lost everything, and hides behind his own delusional self-pride.
Isn't that what makes a man?
Sure, that and a pair of testicles.
Then there's the implied concern for sexual identity, Jackie Treehorn and his cockman thing, and Maud and her blunt artistic statement.
My art has been commended as being strongly vaginal, which bothers some men. The word itself makes some men uncomfortable. Vagina.
Oh yeah?
When we think of symbolism, we tend to refer to it and idealize it as this highbrow concept, but this isn't strictly speaking true. Symbolism doesn't have to be complex or intellectually profound, it can simply help to convey an idea to the audience. For example, just look at Walter's costume design. It's intended to give us further information about his character, such as his militant haircut, precise facial hair, and grey asparagus attire, reinforcing his disciplined military background in Vietnam. And his Ray-Ban aviator sunglasses symbolize his bravado and masking his identity because there is a lack of eye contact to make a human connection, making him cold and unreadable. You can apply the same symbolic logic to any of these characters, whether it be to reinforce information or imply a certain idea. In cinema, props can have a deeply profound relationship with their characters, whether it be more narrative-oriented such as Rosebud in Citizen Kane, or even more metaphorical such as how the red shoes in the conveniently titled The Red Shoes are seen to dominate and even control the journey of its wearer. In the case of Dude, this Persian rug is a symbol of his identity. It adds comfort, a sense of stability, generates a feeling of welcomeness and peacefulness, and even the pattern itself echoes the subculture of psychedelia. The visual style and storytelling is in tune with Dude as a character, and small details reflect his nature, such as him performing Tai Chi, his casual loose clothing, the tiki bar, the messy unkempt house, and it's largely implied that bowling is a form of relaxation for him. And the important thing to remember is that the film is never explicitly stating this information, rather than having it naturally embedded within the mise-en-scene, the placement of everything that appears in the scene. The film is drenched in cultural and political shifts that linger in the background. The Gulf War brewing at the time of the film, Walter and his Vietnam rhetoric.
Smokey, this is not Nam, this is bowling, there are rules.
The Cold War, activism, police brutality.
Ow! Fucking fascist!
Nihilists, underground art movements, neoconservatism, Saddam Hussein's cameo appearance, the genres of music, and a society where you never disrespect the Eagles. But it's Dude's transition between cultures caused by the disturbance of a rug that allows the audience to interweave between a conflicted society at the time. It's a society that isolates Dude for his old, worn-out philosophy, as both mainstream and underground social groups cast him as an outsider who is still living in the past.
Your revolution is over, Mr. Lebowski. Condolences! The bomb's lost!
He's being thrown around and used by others to benefit their own system, a system he doesn't want any part of. As he later confirms to Maude, he drafted the original Port Huron statement and was part of the Seattle Liberation Front, a radical activist group against Vietnam, which adds a humorous irony to his relationship with Walter, a Vietnam veteran.
I'm a fucking veteran, that's who I am.
This is no surprise given that the Coens state that the real-life inspiration for Dude was Jeffrey Dowd, a former member of the notorious Seattle 7. This rug has brought Dude into a world of scrutiny that judges him with contemporary norms. For example, his attempts to get a rug lead to an unfair examination from Jeffrey Lebowski. In this scene, the Dude is awkwardly attempting to address the matter regarding his confrontation with the men that urinated on his rug, but the scene essentially boils down to Dude and Lebowski conflicting over their lifestyle choices. Jeffrey Lebowski unjustly and arrogantly rebukes Dude for being unemployed and unkempt, effectively ignoring the main conflict regarding why the rug was tarnished in the first place. Jeffrey seems to make a very unwarranted attempt to belittle Dude and scorn him for having a socially unacceptable lifestyle because Jeffrey is vainly comparing Dude to himself. This scrutiny then permeates throughout the rest of the film, but Dude clearly takes no offense to any of it as he puts on his sunglasses to block out his disinterest and convey his pacifism towards people with aggressive attitudes.
The fuck is this?
Obviously, you're not a golfer.
At the end of the day, everybody in life has their own unique rhythm, and each of us have our own way to represent that, whether it be in the clothes that we wear, the things that we make, or the work that we do. There is this presence of legacy that exists throughout The Big Lebowski, as each individual character has something to show for it, except for Dude. Dude doesn't want a legacy, nor sees any reason to ever attain one, which is strangely ironic given the legacy that The Big Lebowski has for its cult following. It's a postmodern film, one that commentates on society whilst also serving as a commentary on storytelling and the work of the Coen brothers themselves. The meta nature of the film is worth exploring yourself, and I can subsequently break the fourth wall of this essay by saying that every detail, no matter how disconnected it may be, has a purpose both simple and complex. But despite all these small analytical details, the film works at its very best when you don't think about it, because hell, it doesn't matter. I've made my point.